$1 million neighborhood was constructed on land that had been in his family for over a century. However, when Elijah presented a handwritten clause dated 1923, the entire development and every home within it legally reverted to his ownership. Elijah Jackson didn't require an alarm clock. For 30 years, he had woken naturally just before sunrise, made his coffee, and walked out to the back porch of his father's old farmhouse near Opelika, Alabama. From that quiet wooden deck, he had a clear view across the southern field, the very field where his great-grandfather Otis grew sweet potatoes in the 1930s, and where Elijah's own children had once played in the tall grass. But that morning, something was amiss. The ground felt altered. It trembled. Elijah peered into the distance. Beyond the trees, past the fence line, plumes of red dirt rose into the sky. The machinery was present, heavy, loud, and incongruous. He placed his coffee down and headed towards the sound. Reaching the ridge, he halted, stunned. 3 bulldozers were visible. Behind them, construction teams in hard hats and neon vests were marking the ground with flags, as if claiming it was unclaimed land. But it wasn't. He quickened his pace, the Georgia clay swirling up around his boots. "Hey," he called. A woman in a light gray blazer turned toward him, sunglasses and a clipboard in hand. She seemed out of place in a field. She appeared someone who had never worn work boots. "Can I assist you, sir?" she inquired, her voice suggesting she already anticipated the response. Elijah surveyed the scene. "What is the purpose of your presence on my land?" Her eyebrow showed little movement. This parcel was approved for residential development under West Haven HOA's expansion permit. "You must be mistaken." "Mistaken?" Elijah's voice rose slightly. "My name is Elijah Jackson. That piece of land has been in my family since 1923. It is not for sale. It never has been." The woman held her clipboard up like a shield. "County records indicate this section was listed as unclaimed due to boundary discrepancies during the last zoning update. You are welcome to speak with our legal team, but construction is already underway." Elijah's heart was thumping hard now, but not from fear. "Ma'am, that land is not unclaimed. I have walked it every morning since I was 27 years old. My father was born right over that rise. You're building on ground that holds more history than you could encompass with your permits." She offered a polite, empty smile. "Then I suggest you take it up with zoning and planning. We're moving forward." The machines revved louder behind her. Foundations were being dug. Trees that once shaded Elijah's childhood baseball games were now being stripped away root by root. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply turned and walked back towards his house. His pace was slower now. Inside, he went directly to the cabinet above the fireplace. It held old papers, maps, and deeds, dusty and yellowed with age. He recalled his father once saying Otis didn't trust anybody with this land, not even the government. At the time, Elijah had considered it mere paranoia. But as the ground outside was being torn apart, that paranoia felt more like protection. He carefully unfolded the brittle deed and saw it. The faded ink revealed Otis Jackson's name. 88 acres were purchased for $480 in 1923. There were no loans, no banks involved. It was built on sweat, grit, and the unwavering pride of a man determined to leave nothing for anyone else to claim. Elijah settled down. Documents lay before him. A growing unease began in his stomach. Something felt amiss. This wasn't simply a clerical error. He reached for the phone and contacted the Lee County Zoning Office. "I'm calling regarding a construction crew impacting a portion of my property. My name is Elijah Jackson. My family has owned this land for over 100 years. The person I spoke with initially responded with a detached, scripted tone. They stated that if my land was affected by the zoning realignment, I should have received a mail notification. I did not receive any notification. They suggested that notices can occasionally be lost, and then ended the conversation. It was dismissed with that, lost. Potentially, decades of family ownership could be jeopardized by a misplaced envelope. However, Elijah wasn't solely feeling anger. He recalled a story his father had shared with him. Years had passed since Elijah had last touched the old trunk located at the back of the hallway closet. He pulled it out slowly, coughing as dust filled the narrow corridor. His knees cracked as he knelt, unlatching the brass lock. The lid opened with a tired creak. Inside, among black and white photos, funeral programs, and Otis's tarnished railroad watch, was a bundle of paper wrapped in oilcloth, precisely where his father indicated it would be. Elijah was seated on the floor, cross-legged, carefully unrolling the cloth and retrieving a weighty, leather-bound envelope. This was the original deed, the one Otis had kept for himself. Initially, it appeared like any other legal document: printed text, handwritten notes in the margins, a wax seal partially worn. However, concealed roughly midway through the second page, in Otis's faint, cursive writing, was something unexpected. In his own handwriting, squeezed into the margins, a note read, "If any buildings are built on this land without the agreement of the deed holder or their closest relative, those buildings will automatically belong to the deed holder and no payment will be given." This was witnessed and signed on February 2nd, 1923. Elijah blinked. He read it again and again. His hands trembled. He wasn't legally trained, unlike lawyers, but he knew the story behind that clause. It concerned how Otis had distrusted men in suits, particularly landmen. Following a near deception in 1931, where he almost sold half the property for a minimal price, Otis had personally compensated a notary to assist him in drafting what he termed a safeguard impenetrable to any attempt to bypass it. This safeguard wasn't constructed from physical materials like wood or wire. It was comprised of carefully chosen words. Elijah reached for the telephone once more. He contacted Mr. Boone, the local attorney his family had relied on for 3 generations. "I need to show you something," Elijah stated. "It's about the land, about Otis." After 3 hours, Elijah was seated in the worn leather armchair, facing Boone's desk. The lawyer peered through bifocals, carefully examining the document. "Well, he remarked, tapping a knuckle against the clause. "You don't see this kind of thing anymore, but it's clever. If this was notarized and filed with the original deed, it's enforceable." "It is notarized," Elijah said. Otis made absolutely certain of that. Boone nodded. "It's old, yes, but if it's on the record, it's still the law. It might be buried in archives somewhere, but that doesn't make it disappear. So what do I do?" "First," Boone said, pulling a legal pad toward him, "you don't say a word to those developers. Let them build. Every house they finish becomes yours. It wasn't due to your identity, but because of Otis. That man didn't simply leave you land. He left you a carefully constructed snare. A remarkably clever one." Elijah relaxed, feeling the significance of it acutely. He's been prepared to initiate a conflict, enter courtrooms, and navigate bureaucratic hurdles to demonstrate what rightfully belonged to him. But Otis had already handled the struggle. Now, Elijah only needed to wait. Nevertheless, he wasn't foolish. He contacted 2 additional lawyers, just to be certain. One for Montgomery, one for Birmingham. He provided them with scanned copies of the deed, the clause, and the notarization. Both contacted him again within a week. "This is the most secure private property clause I've ever encountered," one stated, "Mr. Jackson. It's as if your great-grandfather constructed a legal landmine." The other remarked, "I've never seen anything like it. As long as you record the construction, everything they build becomes yours. Every nail, every foundation." Consequently, Elijah purchased a drone and employed a professional surveyor. Motion sensor cameras were installed along the southern field's edge. He meticulously documented everything. This included timestamps, recorded footage, ground measurements, copies of sale signs, and open house flyers. Each day, he observed the actions of the West Haven HOA, actions that he believed they should never have taken. They constructed as if they held absolute ownership and marketed as if they had the right to sell. But Elijah understood the truth. And Otis? Otis had anticipated this day for 100 years. If the clause proved to be true, Elijah understood he had a single course of action remaining: to wait. Each morning, shortly after sunrise, Elijah would position himself on the grassy ridge, the the sight of the former barbed wire fence. He would rest against the wooden post that he and his father had set into the ground many years prior, with his arms crossed and a camera around his neck, observing. The land below was undergoing change. Where sweet potatoes once grew and his cousin had broken his leg attempting to ride a makeshift dirt bike, now stood rows of modern homes. The exteriors featured vinyl siding in muted colors, fenced-in backyards, and driveways so smooth they didn't feel like they belonged in the country. It felt like watching someone else rearrange your childhood memories without permission. Roads were paved with names like Sycamore Lane and Sunset Walk. Pretty names, but lacking any history. Light poles were installed, sidewalks were poured, and even a cul-de-sac was added that cut right through the grove where Elijah's mother had planted muscadines. The HOA proceeded quickly. Too quickly. Within a month, foundations were set for 20 homes. Real estate agents began appearing on weekends, conducting open houses and offering guided tours to couples and retirees. Large signs near the front entrance announced, "Now selling," starting at $385,000. Elijah remained silent. He simply observed. He recorded everything. Daily drone footage was recorded. Close-up photos of property markers were taken. Videos documented workers pouring concrete, installing electrical lines, and setting frames. He organized all of this in a folder on his laptop labeled Otis's Revenge. Occasionally, a project manager or a site supervisor noticed him. Sometimes they waved. Once a man with a clipboard called out, "Morning," with forced cheerfulness. Elijah did not reply. His purpose was not to socialize. He was there to observe. Then Jessica arrived. Jessica Brenner. She remained consistently the woman she had always been, clipboard and blazer. Initially, she didn't recognize Elijah upon his reappearance at the Ridge. However, within 3 weeks, she began to acknowledge him. On one occasion, she smiled and called out, "Still watching us, Mr. Jackson?" Elijah responded by raising his camera and photographing her. She did not smile again afterward. New houses appeared rapidly, like weeds spreading. The swift pace was unsettling. One day, there would be bare ground. 3 days elapsed, and the construction reached the stage of a complete frame and roof. By the close of the second month, 32 homes had been framed. Of those, 16 were completed, featuring laid sod and polished front porches ready for weekend viewings. Elijah, however, remained undeterred. He proceeded to the county clerk's office to retrieve the most recent sales records. He observed West Haven's name appearing alongside buyers, with the buyers primarily from out of state, Ohio, Florida, and even some originating from California. He meticulously recorded observations, noting each closing date. He verified the location of each home, confirming its presence within the 88-acre zone. All residences were situated inside Otis's boundary. All of them. He even overheard Jessica one morning, speaking on the phone while walking the site. She said, "Yeah, Phase 1's flying off the market. We're starting Phase 2 next month. No issues on our end. The local guy watching from the Ridge, just some nosy landowner trying to stir up drama. We're clear." Elijah clenched his teeth, but remained silent. She had no idea. He possessed 3 legal opinions supporting his position. He had documented evidence, with timestamps, of construction on the contested land. He had Otis's clause, and crucially, he had time. Allowing them to build wasn't merely a tactic, it was a matter of justice. Each home they finished, every square foot they sold, contributed to a debt they were unaware of accumulating. Elijah had already calculated the figures. If the construction followed the initial plan for all 156 homes, along with the community clubhouse and parkland, the total value of the real estate would approach $70 million. This would be transferred to him. Jessica believed she was developing a neighborhood, but Elijah understood the reality. She was, in effect, expanding his portfolio. However, as the sold signs accumulated, Elijah started questioning how long he could delay the arrival of actual families. The first time Elijah observed children cycling on the newly constructed sidewalks, he experienced a disconcerting sensation in his chest. A profound sadness, not anger nor regret. The children were oblivious. Naturally, they played, circling, chasing, laughing as children do. Their parents watched, enjoying coffee on porches overlooking the Jackson property. This was land Elijah's great-grandfather had cleared manually. A few houses down, a young couple was unpacking boxes. The man waved. Elijah raised his hand a little without knowing why. He was unfamiliar with them. They were unfamiliar with him. The new driveway occupied what had previously been his grandmother's garden. He walked home at a slower pace that day, not due to any need discomfort, but because the anger that had propelled him was beginning to transform into a different feeling. That evening, he was alone in his den, the deed spread out before him, as usual. The clause remained present, tangible, and still his. However, now he saw faces connected to the houses. He recognized people, not suits, not developers. Families were attempting to establish themselves on property they were unaware was not available for purchase. He reached for the telephone and contacted Boone. "I need to discuss something with you," Elijah stated. Boone responded, "I'm listening." Elijah continued, "If I delay until all the houses are completed, the price will increase significantly. However, if I intervene now, I might prevent these people from facing a difficult situation. They've just moved in, Boone. I observed a young girl riding a bicycle with training wheels today." A considerable silence followed. Boone's voice softened. "That presents a difficult ethical decision, Elijah. You are requesting something that is not permissible. It's a personal matter. Legally, you are justified, as Otis confirmed. However, what kind of justice do you seek? I am unwilling to cause harm to these individuals," Elijah stated. "Yet, I do want West Haven to be held accountable. They didn't merely trespass. They obliterated my family's history as if it held no significance. Then perhaps the true inquiry is it possible to inflict pain upon them without harming the people who purchased those homes in good faith?" Elijah rubbed his eyes. "Is it possible?" Boone paused once more. "Gaining their commitment requires careful consideration and meticulous attention to detail. Allow them to actively participate in the process, enabling them to take ownership. Ensure your guidance is clear and impactful, so it resonates even before others become involved." Elijah reclined in his chair. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above him. "I observed someone planting a tree today," he remarked quietly. He appeared pleased, as if envisioning this as their permanent residence. "Perhaps it still could be," Boone responded. "The outcome relies on your actions." That night, Elijah experienced little sleep. He revisited the perimeter of the property, holding a flashlight, observing lights shimmering from windows overlooking the southern field. Within those houses, families were establishing themselves, displaying pictures, preparing meals, and putting children to sleep. He couldn't have been responsible for their losses, yet he couldn't overlook the arrogance of West Haven, Jessica Brenner's dismissive gesture, the unanswered calls from their lawyers, and their disregard for generations, as if constructing on unclaimed territory. Elijah remained motionless for an extended period at the tree line. The wind rustled through the tall grass. He recalled Otis, remembering the nights that man had kept watch on the porch, a shotgun resting across his lap, prepared for any trouble. Otis favored immediate action. However, Elijah valued strategy and carefully considered his options. He resolved to wait until the final brick was in place, not to inflict harm upon the families, but to ensure those who had shown disrespect towards his family faced the complete consequence. And then, he would ensure no one ever forgot the name Otis Jackson, but Elijah understood that patience wouldn't simplify the next phase. It would only make it more significant. The notification arrived by mail, enclosed within a polished invitation featuring gold detailing. "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of West Haven Estates, Phase 2 celebration and ribbon-cutting ceremony. Join us for food, live music, and a look at the future of luxury living in Easter Alabama." Elijah examined the card for a minute before setting it on the kitchen counter beside the deed. The event was scheduled for a Saturday morning in April. At that time, 138 homes were completely built. An additional 18 were undergoing final inspections. The community center had recently opened, featuring a pool, tennis courts, and a marble floor lobby resembling a country club. It was being hailed as the crown jewel of the county, and every inch of it was situated on Jackson land. The night before, Elijah carefully ironed his only suit, the one he wore to church, weddings, and funerals, paying special attention to the cuffs, a detail Otis would have emphasized. He packed a leather folder containing the original deed, the notarized clause, the surveyor's report, photo evidence, and legal opinions. He placed it on the passenger seat with the care one would give a newborn child. As he arrived at the newly paved entrance of West Haven Estates, the morning sun broke through. Banners fluttered in the breeze. A white tent stood on the clubhouse lawn where guests enjoyed champagne and sampled small sandwiches off silver trays. He parked near the back of the lot, concealed from view. No one recognized him. Not yet. From the periphery of the gathering, Elijah observed as Jessica Brenner, wearing a vibrant yellow dress and large sunglasses, approached the podium. Microphones were adjusted. Camera flashes went off. "Welcome," she exclaimed. "Today signifies both the completion of our second phase and the beginning of a promising new era for our community." Applause resonated. The mayor stood beside her. Several county officials, whom Elijah had contacted months prior without receiving a response, were also present. Jessica continued, her voice gaining intensity with each phrase. "Thanks to our exceptional team and the backing of our local government, West Haven is now a home to 156 families and expanding." The string quartet played gently in the background. Elijah moved forward deliberately, the sound of his shoes on the gravel noticeable. Jessica looked towards him, but showed no reaction. Not yet. He raised his voice just enough to be heard over the music. "Before you cut that ribbon," he said calmly, and the crowd fell silent, heads turning. Jessica blinked. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice strained. "This is a private event." "I understand precisely what this concerns," Elijah stated. "That is why I am present." The mayor appeared doubtful. "Could you please elaborate on the problem?" Elijah raised a leather folder. "I am Elijah Jackson. My family has held title to this land for more than 100 years, and every house, road, tennis court, and mailbox West Haven constructed sits on property that was never legally theirs." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the audience. Jessica moved away from the podium. "We pursued all legal avenues. A zoning error occurred some time back that you failed to fix," Elijah added, opening the file. "And significantly, this deed from 1923 includes a provision drafted by my great-grandfather. It specifies that any building constructed without permission transfers ownership to the deed's owner." He presented the document. A reporter, standing close, moved to photograph the page. Jessica's expression remained unchanged. "You're attempting to deceive us," she whispered. "That clause is invalid after this length of time." Elijah remained unmoved. "I've had this examined by 3 lawyers. They all concurred. It carries legal weight. This land belongs to me, and everything constructed upon it as well." A man in a gray suit spoke quietly to Jessica. She visibly paled. The mayor cleared his throat. "We might need to suspend the ceremony." Jessica faced Elijah again, her voice now firm. "You observed. You monitored our construction, and you remained silent. I informed you on your initial visit that it was my land," he stated calmly. "I saw you smile, and you called security, instructed me to speak with your legal team. So I did." A gasp came from behind you. It could have been a homeowner or someone else. Reporters were now gathering, with flash bulbs popping and pens writing furiously. Jessica appeared as if she'd swallowed glass. "You'll never get away with this," she whispered. "I don't have to get away with anything," Elijah replied. "You passed the folder to me." He closed it carefully and stepped back. The ceremony was halted. No ribbon was cut. Elijah recognized this as merely the initial stage. The significant repercussions hadn't yet materialized. The following morning, Elijah's phone began ringing before sunrise. An unknown number appeared. He allowed it to proceed to voicemail. Subsequently, it rang again and again. By the afternoon, he had accumulated 12 missed calls for voicemails and 2 emails flagged as urgent from West Haven's legal team. By evening, The local news had broadcast a segment entitled "Man Claims Ownership of Entire HOA Community." Is it legal? The anchor appeared bewildered. Elijah was not. He was at his kitchen table with Boone, examining the deed for what seemed like the 100th time. The wording hadn't changed. The ink remained faded but legible. Boone reclined. They are panicking. They constructed a $1 million project on land they didn't own. You possess every advantage. That night, West Haven's president telephoned directly. Elijah didn't recognize the voice. He had never communicated with the man previously, but he detected the strain. "Mr. Jackson, I believe it is time we consider a resolution. We are keen to resolve this matter swiftly and discreetly. The current media coverage is not beneficial to anyone involved. We are ready to provide you with appropriate compensation for the land's assessed value, alongside a goodwill premium." Elijah didn't react with laughter, though it was evident he was restraining himself. "You're suggesting a payment equivalent to the land's previous worth, prior to the construction of the luxury neighborhood? That's a significant offer. It feels like an offensive proposition." Elijah stated, "You didn't simply relocate Earth. You sold property you didn't own. And now you wish to purchase it at a reduced price after you sold it for millions?" Silence followed, and Elijah could hear the breathing on the other end. Controlled. Stiff. "We could challenge this, Mr. Jackson." "You could." Elijah concurred. "But every home you constructed is already sold. Every buyer now has to question who owns their house. You wish to fight? That will be complicated, costly, and public." Another lengthy pause. "We'll be in touch." The line disconnected. 2 days later, the formal offer arrived via courier. The offer included $4.2 million for the land, a non-disclosure agreement, and a confirmation that Elijah would relinquish all claims to the structures built. Boone reacted with disbelief, nearly choking on his coffee. "I've seen offers disguised as bribes before, but this is exceptional," he remarked, pushing the proposal away. Elijah remained silent, his attention fixed on his neighbor's children using a trampoline recently installed where his grandfather used to park his tractor. He was unwilling to have those children displaced. He was unwilling to have those families hurt. However, he also would not allow West Haven to escape with minimal consequences. Therefore, Elijah prepared a response. He refused the offer, requesting the complete assessed value for each sold home and unsold lot, reduced by a 10% discount for a comprehensive settlement. He pledged not to initiate eviction or repossession, but stipulated that West Haven must cover the legal expenses for each homeowner requiring a revised deed. He insisted on ownership of the community center, parks, and all remaining properties, requesting $61 million. There were no restrictions on speaking publicly, and a public apology was required. Jessica did not contact anyone. Her name was absent from any new official communications, though Elijah received reports. She was reportedly on leave. Some believed she had been dismissed, while others said she resigned. Regardless, the dispute had escalated to the boardroom. During the following 4 weeks, legal representatives from both parties met almost daily. Boone and Simone were seated opposite West Haven's corporate counsel, meticulously negotiating while Elijah largely observed the proceedings. They explored various approaches, proposing a reduced sum, hinting at arbitration, and even implying Elijah had knowingly permitted construction to proceed. Elijah remained composed, stating, "You built on my land. I didn't request it. I cautioned you against it. You disregarded me." Ultimately, West Haven conceded. The concluding agreement was finalized 6 weeks after the unsuccessful ribbon cutting. Elijah's total compensation amounted to $54 million, along with ownership of the community clubhouse, the undeveloped lots, and complete legal authority to oversee the correction of homeowner deeds, ensuring no families were displaced. The settlement was formally revealed at a public press conference. Elijah made brief remarks, expressing gratitude to his great-grandfather for his vision and noting that the past occasionally safeguards the future. He departed quietly, avoiding any media attention or interviews. A desire for tranquility remained. However, Elijah wasn't complete. He needed to ensure Otis's legacy represented something greater than retribution. The funds didn't alter Elijah, not in the anticipated manner. He continued to reside in the familiar house, the aged farmhouse where he'd spent his childhood, where his mother's cooking had permeated the walls with the aroma of fried okra, and where Otis's hammer marks were still evident in the doorframe. He didn't purchase a new truck, didn't relocate to a larger city, didn't install fencing around the land. He did, however, create something tangible. Several months following the agreement, Elijah utilized a segment of the funds, approximately $18 million, to purchase an additional 40-acre parcel of land situated 10 miles east outside the town of Tuskegee. This was land that had remained unclaimed for decades. He designated it the Otis Project. Working alongside local contractors, teachers, and community leaders, Elijah initiated the construction of what he envisioned as a unique neighborhood, designed not for financial gain, but for individuals who had previously been excluded from residing in areas like West Haven. The homes were offered at cost, with mortgage support integrated into the program, and applications were evaluated with empathy rather than relying solely on credit scores. Within the first year, 24 homes were finished, and each was occupied by a family. Individuals from all walks of life, teachers, single parents, factory workers, veterans, were welcomed, regardless of their circumstances. One morning, while standing on the first street of the Otis Project, Elijah observed a group of children playing tag on a front lawn. One little boy sparked a memory of his brother Curtis when they were 7 and too stubborn to wear shoes during summer. Boone arrived later that afternoon, holding a clipboard and a wide grin. "You know what they're calling you in town now," he said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The accidental mayor," Boone chuckled. "People say you were given millions, and instead of vanishing, you began constructing front porches." Elijah smiled. Otis didn't nurture hoarders. He cultivated workers. This wasn't merely words. Elijah utilized a portion of the remaining funds to establish a community center in Opelika, offering complimentary tutoring programs, job placement assistance, and a garden where seniors instructed children on cultivating tomatoes that weren't purchased from a grocery store. He also transformed the former West Haven Community Clubhouse, which he now legally owned, into a shared resource center, renaming it Jackson Hall. The tennis courts were made available for complimentary lessons to local young people. The pool offered dedicated swim times for seniors 3 mornings each week. While the Homeowners Association initially disapproved, the homeowners themselves greatly appreciated the changes. Initially, a small number of residents distanced themselves from Elijah, fearing he would seize their homes and viewing him as an adversary. Eventually, they understood that he didn't intend to dismantle what they had established. He simply desired recognition for the work his family had previously undertaken. Now, many approached him directly, seeking information about repairs, suggestions for local services, or guidance on cultivating vegetables in Alabama's challenging red clay. He consistently offered assistance to everyone. "I ain't trying to be a hero," he told a vet, a single mom, and one of the new homeowners. "I simply believe land should never be taken without acknowledging those who labored upon it previously." Yvette nodded. "Well, my son considers you a kind of superhero," Elijah chuckled. "Have you ever seen me attempt to change a flat tire?" He's likely to reconsider quickly. With the commencement of the second year of the Otis Project, Elijah made a final visit to the county archives. This building, where he initially retrieved the original deed, now displayed a framed photograph of Otis Jackson. Below the photo was a plaque that read, "In honor of the man who protected his land so his descendants could protect their community." Elijah stood silently for a moment, then reached into his pocket. He removed a small object wrapped in cloth, Otis's old railroad watch. He carefully set it on the glass counter close to the display. "I always detest being late," Elijah murmured. The sky outside had shifted to that gentle golden hue just prior to sunset, the very shade Otis would often appreciate following a lengthy day in the fields. Elijah smiled, not the smile of a victor, but the smile of one who had fulfilled an obligation. For ultimately, the clause wasn't simply about preventing thieves, it was about ensuring no one overlooked those who preceded them. And now, the land was speaking once more, its voice stronger than the sound of the bulldozers. If this narrative resonated with you, please consider subscribing. More stories such as this, authentic, unfiltered, and grounded in truth, are forthcoming. It was assumed she would be vulnerable, simply another black woman living alone. What they failed to realize was that she had support monitoring their every action. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday, late morning. This was a time when most people were at work or running errands. However, in Roseville, California, early retirement and home offices meant that people observed everything. And someone was already observing from across the street before the lift gate even touched the driveway. Rochelle Carrington, age 42, stood beside her black SUV, a clipboard held in her hand, offering the movers hushed directions. She was tall, with a self-assured stance and a tranquil gaze, moving with the grace of someone who conserved her energy. Her attire consisted of jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved t-shirt, marked with a small breakfast stain, a detail she disregarded. This was not a display of style. It was the beginning of a new phase in her life. She had finalized the purchase of the two-story home just 1 month earlier. It featured a Spanish tile roof, beige stucco, and neatly trimmed hedges. This was a place that declared, "I built this," and she had, though not as her neighbors imagined. The first visitor was a tall man wearing khaki shorts and a golf cap. He identified himself as Douglas Varnell, the head of the HOA. His handshake was brief and impersonal, and he avoided eye contact. "Are you moving in by yourself?" he inquired, observing the security camera boxes near the front door. "No, not everyone is here yet." "Well, if you need anything, we maintain order here," Douglas stated, briefly looking at the SUV before departing without acknowledging her. She observed him vanish behind his hedges. By sundown, Rochelle had unpacked sufficiently to consider the space habitable. Her home office was established, blinds were in place, and the kitchen was supplied. There were no signs, no music, and no boisterous visitors. Only her. Some plants adorned the porch, and a single folding chair was present. The following morning, a note was slid beneath her doormat. Reminder: all porch decor must adhere to HOA regulations. Flags, religious items, and political messages are prohibited. No name, no signature, just that, she chuckled. She didn't have a flag displayed, only a hand-painted ceramic sun her niece created in art class. It was hung askew beside the door. That afternoon, while adjusting her mailbox height, as the HOA had noted it was non-uniform, she observed a woman in yoga pants walking her dog slowly past her house. The dog paused, sniffing the grass, and the woman's gaze lingered a moment too long. "You new here?" the woman asked. "Looks like it," Rochelle responded, straightening. The woman offered a strained smile. "Well, the HOA is quite particular. It helps maintain the appearance of the neighborhood." "I'm familiar with the guidelines," Rochelle stated. The woman chuckled, but the sound lacked warmth. "That's good. We value a specific aesthetic for our neighborhood." The implication was unmistakable. Unbeknownst to them, beyond any prediction they could make, she had done more than simply read their book. She had studied classified briefing reports capable of disconcerting a senator. She had overcome language barriers, handled explosives, and participated in clandestine negotiations in countries she couldn't disclose. A neighborhood association would not deter her. Nonetheless, something felt amiss. She had relocated frequently, new towns, new cities, but the welcome felt staged. A forced pleasantness, conversations tinged with observation. Consequently, she installed the cameras, not out of suspicion, but out of readiness. One positioned above the door, another at the side entrance, and two angled in the front yard, addressing areas overlooked by most. That night, she stood on her porch with a glass of water, observing the street lights activate. A breeze rustled the leaves, and a lone car passed slowly, increasing its speed once it cleared her driveway. She felt no immediate danger, but also lacked a sense of ease. She dispatched a brief message from a disposable phone to a contact listed as Deb's Plumbing. Message content: settle incomplete. Activity already odd. Logging first flags. Standby. There was no response. She didn't require one. However, despite the stillness of that first week, Rachel sensed that the tranquility wouldn't persist for long. Within the second week, a subtle unease began to develop. The first sign was a formal notification affixed to her mailbox concerning parking regulations. The notice stated, "Driveway must be kept clear of oversized vehicles. Please use garage for storage." Her SUV was properly positioned, not obstructing pedestrian access, not encroaching on a neighbor's property, and it accommodated comfortably within the driveway. She removed the notice and placed it in the recycling bin. The following day, an unfamiliar man stood at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, observing her as she watered the succulents in front of her bay window. "Hello," she called out. He remained silent, simply staring, before slowly walking away. That night, a second note appeared, printed entirely in capital letters. It read, "No unauthorized vehicles. Surveillance is active. HOA monitors street traffic." Surveillance. The irony caused her to laugh. She reviewed the surrounding area once more. Everything appeared normal, with the exception of a mounting feeling that someone, or multiple individuals, disapproved of her presence. Several days passed, and then the police arrived. It was shortly after 6 p.m. golden sunlight illuminating the porch. A patrol car stopped and parked directly in front of her home. Two officers, courteous but formal, approached. "Ma'am, we received a call regarding a disturbance," one of them stated. "Reports of loud arguing." She blinked. "I reside alone. Are there any visitors this evening?" "No. You are welcome to verify." They did not enter, but they recorded a few observations and then departed. 15 minutes elapsed before she observed Douglas Varnell once more. Identical khaki shorts, same gait. He did not approach the door this time, merely stood close to his mailbox, engaged in conversation with a woman in yoga pants. Both glanced towards her. Rachel opened her front door and stepped outside, signaling that she was aware of their presence. Douglas nodded once. "Just checking to ensure everything is all right over there," he called out. "I'm all right," she responded. "Good, you know. The police visit when things don't conform to the regulations. Noise complaints, misuse of property. I pay the same fees as everyone else," she stated calmly. He raised his eyebrows, seeming to consider that a provocation, and then returned to his messaging. Later that week, the trash collection bypassed her house completely. While every other container on the street was serviced by sunrise, hers remained uncollected. She contacted the sanitation department. There was no record of a missed pickup request, they stated. "This might seem unusual," she commented, "but is it possible someone reported my house as vacant?" The woman speaking on the phone hesitated briefly. "Indeed, yes. That's what appears in the notes." Rachel took a slow, deliberate breath. "I reside here. We will resolve this." She ended the call and returned to her porch, holding her phone, the camera light blinking gently above. That evening, her back fence gate was discovered slightly open. Not fully, but enough to indicate someone had attempted to open it. The lock still engaged when she tested it, but the chain showed a new abrasion, as if it had been pulled. This was sufficient for her. She accessed the encrypted tablet she kept in a locked drawer in her home office and started a low-level alert. Possible harassment escalation. Passive monitoring began. Authorization to activate detail? Moments later, a reply. Authorization approved. Detail shifting from secondary to active. Karina Bell had lived 2 doors down for years. She was a retired postal worker who enjoyed begonias and frequently discussed her needs, seemingly avoiding conversations about politics. However, the residents of Briar Hollow Court were unaware that Karina had previously worked in logistics within international security, a confidential role originating from Langley many years prior. She was indebted to Rachel, a significant debt. That favor had now been requested. The following morning, Karina arrived at Rachel's door, presenting a basket of muffins and a quiet smile. "She mentioned she thought you might appreciate some company," Rachel said. Rachel agreed and moved out of the way. "I'm assuming you're not simply visiting?" Karina asked, drawing closer. "I'm already diverting 2 drones away from your land." The homeowners association isn't your sole concern. Before Rachel could inquire about her meaning, a knock sounded at the door. And this time, it wasn't Karina with baked goods. It was 4:42 p.m. when they arrived, not in a squad car, not in a designated homeowners association vehicle. A silver sedan, notable for a cracked front headlight and excessively tinted windows, pulled up. Two men exited the vehicle. They wore khaki pants and tucked-in polo shirts, each with laminated badges attached to their belts, badges that appeared cheaply made. One held a clipboard. The other feigned taking photographs of her yard with a phone. Rachel recognized this pattern. She had witnessed similar encounters previously, not in the suburbs, but in Havana, in Berlin, and in Port-au-Prince. The imposter, the bullying tactic, the unauthorized figure who falters when challenged. She unlocked her door before they even reached it. Karina remained inside, seated peacefully on the living room couch, enjoying tea as if it were a typical Wednesday. "You must be Miss Carrington, the one with the clipboard," she stated, her tone dripping with false sweetness and a sense of superiority. "We're with the Briar Hollow HOA Enforcement Committee. We have a few items to discuss with you." Rachel rested against the doorframe. "Your badges are not scanning. You are not listed in the directory, and the HOA does not conduct in-person visits without a 72-hour notice." The man blinked, surprised she didn't react. "Ma'am," he said, adjusting his tone, "your porch has items that are not permitted, and we're receiving multiple complaints regarding frequent visitors." "Is that against the rules?" she asked, remaining still. The second man advanced. "We require you to step outside. We want to review the violations with you." "No, thank you." The first man's smile disappeared. "We're simply attempting to assist you in preventing fines. This situation could worsen. I find that unlikely." They shared a glance. Then, the expression changed. Without speaking, they moved quickly. One attempted to grasp her arm. The other reached for the screen door. Karina reacted before they made contact. "Back away," she stated firmly, moving with a skill unexpected of a retiree. Her phone was already in her hand, her thumb activating a sequence other than calling 911. "Who the hell are you?" one of the men demanded. "Back up," Karina said. The man pulled the door open forcefully. Rachel remained still. She didn't cry out. She didn't retaliate. She turned a little and pressed her hand down firmly on his wrist, securing her grip with her thumb tucked in and her elbow bent. It was a precise maneuver learned from her training. The man swore, taking a step back. "Enough," Rachel said softly. They weren't prepared for that. The second man recovered quickly. He moved forward again, but the sound of tires on gravel caused all three to stop. Two dark SUVs entered the street. There were no sirens, no lights, and no identifying markings, only a calm, consistent approach. The men glanced back, attempting to assess the situation. "You can run," Rachel stated, "but it will be more difficult." The men remained still. One appeared to be breathing heavily, while the other attempted to appear composed. Shortly after, both SUVs stopped. Four people emerged, two from each vehicle, dressed in ordinary clothing and wearing sunglasses, with no visible weapons. They proceeded together, swiftly and effectively. The individual holding the phone attempted to flee. He managed 6 feet before being restrained, with his arm twisted behind his back and his phone sliding across the pavement. The person with the clipboard made no attempt to resist. He simply sat down on the porch step, as if his confidence had been abruptly removed. One of the agents, a slender man with graying hair, addressed Rachel. "Miss Carrington, are you all right?" She affirmed her well-being. Minimal physical contact. No injuries were sustained. The camera recorded the entire incident. "Excellent," he stated, then turned to Karina. Karina shrugged, acknowledging the notification. The timing felt correct. Within 10 minutes, the two individuals posing as law enforcement officers were secured, their identities confirmed, and they were positioned on the curb, resembling reprimanded children. Residents started observing from behind curtains. Several opened garage doors and lingered in the darkness, feigning sweeping activities. No one intervened. Even Douglas Varnell, the taller of the two men, now in handcuffs, finally spoke. We were just trying to make sure the neighborhood stayed safe. From what? Rachel inquired. He remained silent, but his eyes' movement towards the Douglas Varnell house indicated his intentions clearly. The other man's gaze directed at Douglas Varnell's house was observed. It wasn't missed by Rachel. It wasn't missed by the agents. It wasn't even missed by Karina, who now stood quietly beside the porch steps, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the street as if observing a chessboard illuminate. An agent, a woman in her late 30s with a distinct New Jersey accent, overheard the interaction. She gave a single nod to her colleague and walked along the sidewalk towards Douglas's front door. He did not respond to the knock. Shortly after, the agent requested a second team. There were no sirens, only unmarked vehicles as previously. It was a display of clean, cold, silent efficiency. By this time, several more neighbors had emerged, remaining close to mailboxes and speaking quietly among themselves. None of them moved closer to the house. Rachel remained seated on her porch, still and observant, watching the events transpire. Karina stood beside her, a hand gently touching the porch rail. He never was that bright, Karina murmured. You know him? Rachel inquired. Not personally, but I've been observing his cameras for weeks. Rachel lifted an eyebrow. The ones he stated were for wildlife? Yes. It was peculiar how the wildlife seemed to resemble women walking their dogs or brown children on bicycles. The clipboard guy was escorted into one of the SUVs. The other individual, identified as Ronan Kessler, had a sealed juvenile record and resided just outside city limits. Both were hired laborers, not residents. However, their paychecks provided a lead. One of the agents returned to the porch, crouching to Rachel's eye level. We are currently reviewing surveillance footage. Your neighbor across the street has cameras. We are obtaining access through municipal override. The agent paused. Do you think he is connected? I believe whoever is orchestrating this considered you an easy target. Rachel gazed across the street. Douglas's front window blinds were now closed completely. You're going to find this surprising, the agent stated. Situations like this, they occur more frequently than one might assume. Fabricated HOAs, independent residents, private contractors, all operating discreetly. However, they selected the incorrect address this time. Karina quietly laughed. Absolutely. An hour elapsed, and the federal agents possessed sufficient evidence to knock on Douglas's door. This time he responded. Rachel didn't hear everything that was said, but she observed his expression when he understood this extended beyond a local matter. He was questioned about payments routed through a shell company, the number of anonymous police calls he had recorded from his residence, the fabricated notices, and the bogus HOA violations. He attempted to dismiss the inquiries. He supposedly stated, just doing my part to keep things orderly. However, order wasn't the core issue. The problem wasn't about porch decorations or SUVs. The difficulty arose because someone such as Rachel Carrington, given her measured actions and unwavering composure, undermined the sense of authority some residents valued in areas like this. They were unaccustomed to someone who didn't require their validation. Now, each of their methods had been recorded, the timing noted, and data compared. Returning to the porch, Karina moved nearer. Are you all right? I'm fine, Rachel replied, but I'm weary of this routine. Karina offered a slight smile. Perhaps a rewrite is in order. By evening, news had circulated. 2 arrests were made, a federal investigation commenced, and a request for voluntary interviews was sent to several homeowners on the block. Remarkably, no one questioned how Rachel had reacted so swiftly or why tactical agents had arrived in less than 10 minutes. They were unaware of the agency clearance, the debt of gratitude, or the discreet surveillance that had been ongoing for the past 5 weeks. Most importantly, they didn't realize who they were confronting as what seemed like a simple removal became a public event. Now, it was impossible to ignore what lay hidden just below the surface. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt shaken. It was evident in the closed garage doors, in the disrupted routines of morning walkers, and even the talkative couple on the corner remained silent. The normal pace was broken, and everyone understood the reason. Rachel was on her porch once more, holding coffee and with one leg crossed. There was no music, no book, only observation. She had experienced observation previously, in locations where a smile directed at the incorrect individual could result in detention. However, here in Roseville, the interactions followed a subtle understanding. Neighborhood expectations, community principles, safety anxieties, harassment disguised in a cardigan. Karina approached mid-morning, a file held beneath her arm. She remained silent until she was seated. "They were digging deeper than I thought," she said. "We caught 3 more devices near your yard, hidden in sprinkler heads." Rachel blinked. "They planted audio? Worse. Motion sensors, thermal reads. Somebody was building a case for something, or pretending to, from across the street." Another neighbor, an older woman named Leanne Price, peered through her curtains. This time, she didn't flinch when their eyes met. "She was the one who called the cops on you." "Twice," Rachel said quietly. Karina refrained from questioning how he possessed that information. Later that afternoon, a federal vehicle made a return visit, this time carrying official documents, subpoenas. The investigation had broadened. An examination of Douglas Varnell's finances uncovered a series of payments directed to private neighborhood enforcement agents working through a business named Civic Harmony Consultants, LLC. Their actions extended beyond simply fabricating HOA credentials. They were components of a loosely structured system designed to instill intimidation. This operation wasn't recent, nor was it particularly well concealed. The matter simply hadn't faced scrutiny before. Until now. Now, with a formal federal document involved, it was receiving serious consideration. A representative from the HOA board arrived later that day, appearing distressed. A quiet woman, Marisol Dupree, holding a notepad and offering apologies frequently. "We weren't aware, Miss Carrington," she said. "Douglas managed all enforcement concerns. We hadn't authorized any personal visits." "He informed me you had," Rachel said. Marisol averted her gaze. "I am truly sorry. Please don't apologize." Rachel emphasized the need for transparency, stating, "Let people know what happened." "We will." Before Marisol departed, she hesitated at the foot of the porch steps. "If it means anything, we're grateful you didn't retaliate, that you remained calm." Rachel responded, "I didn't remain calm. I remained prepared." News of the incident spread beyond the cul-de-sac. By the weekend, a local news van arrived. The reporter did not make contact, simply filming discreetly from a distance until federal agents requested they depart. The incident was already gaining traction online. A recording from a neighbor's Ring camera captured a portion of the confrontation, including the fake HOA badge, the shouting, and the takedown. When the clip appeared on social media, it ignited widespread anger. This wasn't solely due to what occurred with Rachel, but also because the situation resonated with many. Messages flooded in from across the country. One person shared, "This happened to my dad in Austin." Another recounted a similar experience in Phoenix, noting that the police sided with the HOA. The pattern of individuals wielding rules as a tool, it's a genuine problem. The streets of Roseville became a subject of discussion, not due to their well-maintained lawns or excellent school ratings, but because of what occurs when private power believes it can operate without accountability. Later that night, Karina brought over 2 glasses of wine. The sun had set. The porch light hummed gently above them. "You thinking about moving?" she asked. "No," Rachel said. "Not yet." Karina nodded. "Good, because it's different now. They know someone's observing from a distance, but the significant change wasn't among the neighbors." The realization dawned on Rachel. She understood how silence allowed them to operate and how a carefully chosen reply could effectively halt that activity. 2 days elapsed before a discreet meeting occurred at an unremarkable building close to the Sacramento Municipal Complex. There was no media coverage, no sensational announcements. Simply a table, 4 chairs, and 3 individuals who possessed a true understanding of how things functioned. Rachel was positioned at the far end, wearing all black and with a manila folder placed before her. Directly facing her was Agent Colin Braddock, the lead investigator for the now-active federal inquiry into Civic Harmony Consultants. A DHS cybersecurity representative sat to his left, their expression unreadable. Karina was positioned on Rachel's right, maintaining her usual composure. What you're dealing with, Braddock began, extends beyond this HOA or even this neighborhood. The group you identified? They have been operating in clusters across several western states. Rachel acknowledged this with a nod. They exploit delayed accountability, focusing on local homeowners associations, retirement communities, and gated suburbs. Braddock indicated a tablet. They create a facade of authority, use regulations as weapons, and target individuals who don't conform, typically those with out-of-state license plates or who appear different, particularly if they move in without drawing attention. They went beyond establishing a false authority, Karina stated. They were collecting information. The DHS representative looked up. Your residents had passive thermal tags. That is not homeowners association technology. It's surplus military-grade equipment. Braddock leaned forward. Here's the part you're likely to find concerning. He indicated a flag communication from 6 months ago. One of our side channels detected it, but it wasn't initially prioritized. He slid the document across the table, a printout of an encrypted email chain with the subject line, New resident, confirmed background, CIA link. Rachel read it silently. Someone was investigating me before I even closed escrow. We believe so, Braddock stated. While they weren't entirely sure of your identity, their discomfort was evident, and the harassment began swiftly. It was a probing of limits. And if I had strongly opposed it, she mentioned they would portray me as the instigator. He confirmed this. It's a recognizable sequence. They instigate reactions, then amplify the pressure. They deliberately accumulate records to suggest instability. Karina added, they've underestimated this individual. Braddock offered a knowing smile. That's the consensus we've been receiving. This extended beyond individual grievances it always had. The situation Rachel encountered wasn't a simple dispute between neighbors. It was interwoven within a broader structure that relied on unspoken agreements. Following the meeting, as they headed to the car, Karina questioned the outcome. Do you believe this will hold now? With the charges and the exposure? Rachel responded, they'll suppress some of it, shielding the homeowners. Details will be concealed. But someone is observing now. It's no longer hidden. That evening, back at home, she retrieved a long untouched, dusty photo album from her bedroom closet. The album contained pictures from past projects, some with unclear faces, and others cut from international newspapers. Among them was a faded photograph of her mother standing in front of their house in Paterson, New Jersey, during the time a neighbor attempted to initiate eviction proceedings due to a zoning issue. She had resisted, steadfastly, and ultimately prevailed. That determination persisted. As dusk settled, Rachel stepped onto her porch once more. This time, she wasn't alone. Several neighbors, those who had previously avoided her, were walking dogs, watering plants, and acting as if they didn't notice her. A man across the street offered a small wave. She made no response. Not yet. She settled, crossed her arms, and gazed out at the cul-de-sac she now perceived distinctly. Not as a haven, but as a reflection. I used to think I could simply buy peace, she said aloud. Karina, having returned, responded while looking at her phone. You still can. It simply costs more than many anticipate. They remained in silence for a considerable time. Within the building, the cameras continued to record events. This wasn't due to an expectation of further incidents, but because detailed records were now essential for safety. Although the immediate danger seemed to have subsided, Rachel understood that the situation wasn't resolved. True success wasn't achieved through a single apprehension or a single exposure. It was about refusing to allow herself to diminish. A week later, the neighborhood had resumed its familiar routine. Lawn services were operating again, and children were riding their bikes. However, a palpable sense of caution lingered, particularly near the Carrington house. Some people offered waves, others deliberately avoided looking. A few seemed to desire an apology, but lacked the words to express it. Rachel didn't wait for them to decide what to do. Each morning, she worked from her home office. Her evenings were spent tending to the garden, which she had neglected since moving to Meadow Creek. She began walking around the neighborhood again, not out of obligation, but because she was able. Influence wasn't solely about defense. It was about existing openly without needing authorization. Karina arrived one evening, carrying a folded lawn chair and a chilled bottle of mineral water. "I thought I'd keep you company," she said. They sat quietly for a while, observing the sky transform into a gentle orange hue. "I've been thinking," Karina stated. "Why do you think they were so bold? I mean, they didn't know who you were. But still, they didn't need to know." Rachel responded. "They just assumed I wouldn't fight back." Karina nodded. "Because most people don't. Because most people can't." They paused, letting the observation linger. It was an accurate assessment. Not everyone has a federal contact on speed dial. Not everyone has decades of tactical training. Not everyone has a Karina 2 doors down. And that's the point. The situation in Roseville extended beyond mere bias or intimidation. It involved a framework that facilitated individuals acting as gatekeepers, cloaking themselves in manufactured authority, fabricated concern, and deceptive neighborly gestures. They had established a functioning system. This system persisted until someone disrupted the established pattern. Afterward that evening, Rachel composed a letter at her desk. The letter was not addressed to the HOA, nor to her neighbors, but to a young woman she had yet to meet, someone who would eventually confront a similar circumstance. She wrote, "Don't wait for permission to have space. Claim it, subtly if possible, forcefully if necessary. Expect resistance. But remember, they consistently underestimate what they don't comprehend. Retain records, maintain composure, and most importantly, remain present, even when they desire your absence." She folded the paper, placed it within a journal, and slid it onto a shelf beside her badge. Not an award, not a recollection, a prompt, because this extended beyond a porch or a fence or a neighborhood rulebook. The narrative explored the lengths individuals would take to safeguard their perceived reality, and how swiftly that perception crumbled when someone asserted themselves and resisted conformity. The following Sunday, a community announcement circulated detailing a town hall meeting intended to rebuild faith and openness regarding neighborhood regulations. Douglas Varnell's name was discreetly eliminated from all HOA documentation. There was no formal justification provided. Rachel wasn't invited. However, she attended regardless. She positioned herself in the back row, remained silent, and simply listened, not to the spoken words. Regarding the atmosphere, however, the hesitant coughs, the measured language, the alteration in stance upon noticing her presence. Later, as she departed, Leanne Price approached her. "I wasn't aware the situation escalated to that degree," she remarked, adjusting her handbag strap. "We simply sensed something was amiss." "What was amiss?" Rachel inquired. Leanne paused. "I suppose I hadn't anticipated you would be so ready." "I didn't anticipate needing to be." They remained there briefly. Then Leanne gave a short nod and walked off. This wasn't reconciliation, but it signaled the beginning of a reckoning. That night, Rachel posted a single sentence on her infrequently used social media account. "Politeness won't save you, but preparedness might." It quickly became widespread within days. People were no longer simply observing the drama. They were recognizing the underlying pattern, and perhaps, just perhaps, understanding it was time to disrupt it. So if you've reached this point, keep this in mind. Resilience isn't always about direct action. It can be found in a chair on a porch. It can be seen in a camera angled perfectly. It can be heard in a voice that remains strong. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe. Someone else out there needs to experience it as well. Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat in full. However, when she was discreetly requested to move to the rear of the aircraft, she did not cause a disturbance. The remaining passengers did, and social media quickly followed suit. Marlene Daniels was not a woman who desired much. She had never been. This was true when she dedicated 32 years to Birmingham Public Schools and remained true when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary following her husband's passing. She was reliable. She was resilient. At the age of 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd often advised others to do: take up space. This was the reason she purchased the ticket. Her granddaughter, Alia, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Alia was the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a significant occasion, and Marlene? She planned to attend, positioned prominently, dressed in her best Sunday clothes, and cheering as she once did at those high school basketball games. She had flown previously, certainly, but always in coach. Always quiet. Always practical. This time, however, she reserved a first-class seat. She paid in full. She selected her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of stating, I'm still here. I'm present. Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she appeared like someone who knew who she was. She wore gray slacks, a pearl gray sweater, small gold earrings, and a leather handbag that bore the marks of years of careful use. Her hair, silver and neatly arranged, was styled in a low twist. A smile touched her lips as she greeted the gate agent. A smile offered not from obligation, but from a genuine desire to be considerate, even when faced with unkindness. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She appreciated the formality. Miss Daniels. It still carried a certain dignity. As she entered the plane, several passengers in the front cabin briefly looked up. A few offered smiles. A man, appearing to be in his 40s, gave a courteous nod. Seated across the aisle, a younger woman wearing a denim jacket and chunky boots was reading a magazine. Marlene located her seat, 2A, and made herself comfortable. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her sweater, and gazed out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a positive omen. Flight attendants moved along the aisle, arranging luggage and engaging in brief conversations. One offered her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, her smile seeming practiced. Marlene quietly laughed. "Is it that noticeable?" She responded. "You look wonderful," the attendant continued. "Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded graciously and redirected her gaze toward the window, her thoughts drifting to Alia's smile and the swift passage of time. It felt like only yesterday she had been in the front office of Jefferson Middle, observing her granddaughter twirling in her chair while completing paperwork. She relaxed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything appeared tranquil, orderly, and correct. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant stated, differing from the initial attendant. The attendant was young, blonde, with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there appears to have been a seat assignment mix-up. Please move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, seeming to question if she's understood correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked. "There's been a change. A late passenger arrived. The system assigned you to this seat in error. We require this seat to be free." Marlene remained perfectly still. Her voice remained even, and her eyes didn't show any displeasure. She reached into a bag, retrieved the paper boarding pass she always printed, and displayed it. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. It was paid for and chosen by me." The attendant looked at it, then checked the aisle. "I understand. I truly do, but we're aiming to resolve this swiftly before takeoff." The woman in the denim jacket, seated across the aisle, lowered her magazine. She observed her sitting there prior to anyone else boarding. She stated softly. Marlene remained still. Not yet. Her fingers rested on the chair arms, applying just enough pressure to keep her steady. "I'm not attempting to cause disruption," she said calmly, "but I reserved this seat months ago." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now." Then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag, and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. "Right this way, sir." But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She detected the subtle sounds of passengers arranging themselves, zippers fastening, and safety belts securing. Yet the atmosphere surrounding her felt heavy, resistant to movement. The man now stood almost directly in front of her seat, looking down with an expression that was a blend of confusion and annoyance. "This is two-way, right?" he asked, looking towards the flight attendant, but not Marlene. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Just a minor misunderstanding. We are resolving it now." Marlene spoke with composure, but her voice conveyed firmness. "How is this addressed?" The attendant attempted to maintain a pleasant demeanor. "We simply require you to take seat 19C. It remains a satisfactory seat, and we will ensure you receive compensation for the disruption." "Disruption?" Marlene lifted her eyebrows. "Being asked to vacate the seat I paid for in front of a completely full plane after I had already been seated? That is not a small matter." The man finally made eye contact with her. He did not speak, just gazed. And something about that silence, easy for him, unsettling for her, felt significant. "Ma'am," the flight attendant repeated, her voice now more assertive. "Please." Marlene glanced around. Silence filled the cabin, but eyes were fixed on her. The man seated across the aisle appeared uneasy, fidgeting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine continued to stare. She didn't desire to create a disturbance. It had never been her way. She had always instructed her students to overcome embarrassment with grace, not noise. At this point, she questioned what she would be conveying if she were to leave unnoticed. However, her dignity couldn't sustain the entire journey. Marlene carefully released her seatbelt, retrieved her bag, and rose. The flight attendant sighed, clearly relieved. "Thank you," she stated, and moved to allow the man to take the seat, where he opened his laptop and straightened his tie as if it were a routine occurrence. Marlene held her back straight as she walked along the narrow aisle, passing rows of strangers who didn't meet her gaze. She arrived at row 19, located seat C, and put her bag under the seat without a word. The chair was smaller, situated nearer the restroom, noisy, confined, and not at all what she had anticipated. She settled in quietly, feeling a stinging in her eyes. A man seated across the row, a teenager wearing headphones, looked at her with a questioning expression. She gave him a weary smile. A weight settled in her chest, not from the seat itself, but from the lack of surprise. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that circumstances had changed. That at her age, following her considerable contributions to others, she wouldn't need to demonstrate her right to what she had purchased. She glanced down at her hands, noticing a slight tremor. Her wedding band remained on her finger, even after so many years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had dedicated her life to her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. "Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked." Marlene leaned her head against the window. She remained silent, her gaze fixed. Then, a subtle change occurred. "Excuse me?" The voice came from the woman wearing a denim jacket, who had now risen to her feet. "Hello," she said, her tone clear enough for Rose to hear. "What transpired here doesn't feel right." Marlene turned, visibly surprised. The woman continued, gesturing towards the front. "That lady had her seat initially. I observed her checking in and taking her assigned seat. She presented a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? What was the reason for that?" A moment of silence followed. Several passengers glanced upward, seemingly attentive. A flight attendant hurried over, attempting to soothe the woman. "I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving," she said. "No," the woman responded, her voice rising. "You moved her because you believed she wouldn't speak out. But I will," and she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin, which had just moments before been filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight conversation, was now utterly silent. Marlene remained still. She remained in 19C, uncertain whether to feel embarrassed or thankful. Perhaps both. She observed the woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with a confident posture and eyes filled with frustration, firmly holding her position. "I'm sorry," the woman continued, now speaking to everyone nearby. But you can't ignore what just occurred. You moved that woman from her purchased seat, offering no reason. And this man, she indicated towards two, simply walked in as if everything was normal. The gentleman in the seat glanced up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He remained silent. Why? The woman insisted. And I want the rest of the plane to hear, because this isn't correct. The flight attendant paused. She began to speak, but then glanced around. Passengers were turning to look. Phones appeared. A red-haired teenager 2 rows back had his camera aimed directly forward, recording openly. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. People's gazes were moving. Tension increased. Suddenly, a voice from row 3 interrupted. She is correct. A man, appearing to be in his late 40s, with a beard streaked with gray and wearing a worn Detroit Tigers cap, rose partially from his seat. I observed it as well. She was already present, holding a boarding pass. You moved her without justification, and honestly, I am not satisfied with that. The flight crew exchanged looks. Another attendant, taller, older, possibly more experienced, approached, placing a hand lightly on the younger woman's arm. We will be able to discuss this once we are airborne, he stated. The woman in denim remained still. No, you speak now. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate action. And if no one else is going to voice it, I will. That woman was repositioned because you believed she wouldn't object due to her age. And let's be frank, because she is black. That word resonated like a sharp rebuke in the quiet. Marlene averted her eyes. She felt a flush rise up her neck. She had never enjoyed being the focus of attention. A voice arose from the rear of the cabin. That's unfair, a younger man murmured. There's no way that should have occurred. Another person then spoke, their voice raised. Return her seat. The man wearing a two-way radio seemed uneasy and finally closed his laptop. He glanced at the flight crew. Honestly, I don't need the seat if it's going to cause a disturbance, he stated. I simply took the one they assigned to me. The assertive woman responded with a derisive laugh. You observed her relocation and didn't inquire, not even once. He shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact. It's not my responsibility. The flight attendant tried to manage the situation. We recognize emotions are intense. Let's resolve this promptly so we can depart on time. However, the man wearing the Tiger's cap interrupted. Not until she receives her seat back. He turned and addressed Marlene. Ma'am, he said, would you like your seat back? She paused. She had dedicated much of her life to instructing others on how to utilize their voice to champion what is just. Now her own trembled. I don't want to be the cause of this flight being delayed, she stated quietly. You are not, the woman from row 2 responded. You are the reason it might finally be rectified. That was when it occurred. The man in row 4 rose, followed by a couple situated behind him. If she doesn't receive her seat, someone declared, we are not sitting either. Flight attendants began to panic. Someone reached for the phone to contact the pilot. The aircraft doors remained open, and established procedures were now being implemented. The chief flight attendant returned, visibly agitated. We need to halt boarding, a fellow passenger interjected. It's too late. The planes are full. Resolve this immediately. Marlene rose deliberately. Her hands were steady now. I didn't request this situation, she stated. However, I will not remain here and pretend I didn't receive what I paid for. I secured seat 2A. I checked in promptly. I adhered to every guideline. Throughout my life, I've adhered to every guideline. Then, suddenly, the man in 2A rose. He offered no apology. He avoided eye contact. He simply took his laptop and proceeded toward the rear of the plane. The crew swiftly assisted Marlene in returning to the front. As she passed, numerous passengers acknowledged her with nods. Several offered words of encouragement. Good for you. You didn't deserve that. We saw. She resumed her seat in 2A. The armrests felt altered this time. Not stiff, not cold. By the time the plane departed, the video had already been uploaded online. As the aircraft ascended through the clouds, the mood within the cabin remained subdued. Marlene was seated in 2A, her hands calmly resting in her lap. She had not consumed the offered beverage. It wasn't necessary. Her mind was occupied. She felt no anger, not a vocal expression of it. She was considering her granddaughter. reflecting on the world Alia was entering with that degree. This incident, this small public humiliation, wasn't unprecedented. However, something about it felt different this time. In row 18, a teenager with red hair had already posted a 23-second video to TikTok with a caption, "They move an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude." The entire plane seemed to agree. The reactions were immediate. "That's disgusting. She deserves to have that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them." By the time the flight landed in Indiana, 3 influencers had compiled a video that was distributed by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and it had already surpassed 80,000 views. Marlene was unaware of any of this. She was still arranging her sweater and getting ready to text Alia upon arriving at the terminal. Her phone had remained turned off throughout the flight. As passengers exited the aircraft, several briefly touched her arm. "Your class act," they said. "Glad they made it right." She softly expressed her gratitude, her eyes appearing warm yet weary. She felt unsure how to react to the focus. A portion of her longed to retreat into the airport bustle, simply taking her shuttle and heading into town. However, upon activating her phone, it vibrated, and vibrated again. Numerous messages arrived, some from her children, others from past colleagues, and even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her youngest son, Louis, had attempted to call her 3 times. She accepted the call on the 4th ring. "Mama," he said, his voice already filled with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why? You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone has a video of you standing up for yourself. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. I didn't even know she was filming. She captured everything. They attempted to displace you from a seat you paid for, and people are reacting strongly. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Yes, you did," Louis stated. By the time she reached the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 additional calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from the Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, allowing the shuttle to rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. A college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie sat beside her. She looked at Marlene, paused briefly, then shifted in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began hesitantly. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one in the video?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" The girl smiled. "People share things that are important. And this was important." Marlene paused. "It's odd. I didn't intend to be involved in something like this." The girl spoke softly, saying it hadn't been planned. However, she acknowledged that Marlene had managed the situation in a manner that resonated with many. Marlene returned a smile, then glanced out the window, observing the passing billboards and highway signs. She had simply intended to attend a graduation, and now the entire country was discussing the event. However, the airline remained silent, an unsettling silence. By the time Marlene arrived at her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already appearing in the subject lines of press releases. Unofficially, naturally, no company was willing to acknowledge anything that could incur a financial cost. However, the airline, Coastal Air, was aware of the situation. They had viewed the videos, read the online discussions, and hastily convened in private meetings. Marlene's phone rang again as she entered the elevator. An unfamiliar number. She allowed it to proceed to voicemail. She felt weary. She had traveled across 2 states, experienced humiliation, then received applause, and subsequently been drawn into a situation she hadn't requested. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Ollie across that stage. Her room overlooked a small park where families walked dogs and students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV. Local news was already on. The video, now exceeding 2.3 million views in under 12 hours, depicts what seems to be an elderly black woman being requested to relocate from her designated seat in the first-class cabin to make room for a younger white passenger. Other passengers on board stepped in, and the woman was ultimately returned to her original seat. She silenced the notification. Her phone vibrated again, a text from Lewis. Coastal Air has released a statement. It's underwhelming. She clicked the link. The official statement read, "We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced." Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the time she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She avoided using that term, especially after incidents occurred. That evening, she accepted a phone call. Marlene Daniels? The voice was distinct and resolute. It belonged to a woman, professional in tone. Yes, speaking. This was Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We're interested in having you on our show tomorrow morning, just to briefly discuss your experience. It won't be intrusive. You're seen as representing something larger, and people are paying attention. Marlene hesitated. I'm not a symbol, she replied. I know, Nina responded, her voice gentle and sincere. That's why her refusal of the interview felt significant, at least for the time being. A quiet impulse arose within her. She had dedicated her life to assisting others in expressing themselves. Perhaps now was her opportunity to speak out once more. The following morning, she composed a handwritten note. It was brief, a single page in length, but each word was carefully chosen. She began with the sentence, "I wasn't trying to go viral. I attempted to see my granddaughter." She spoke about dignity, about how simple it is to overlook older individuals, about what it feels like to be marginalized, not for the first time, but for the thousandth. And she concluded with this, "I spent decades telling young people they were important, that their presence was important, that they belonged. I still believe that. But sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge." She entrusted the letter to Lewis, who shared it on his social media with her consent. Within hours, by lunchtime, it had accumulated over 400,000 shares. Her story appeared on talk shows. An op-ed piece in the Indianapolis Journal commended her composure. Civil rights advocates incorporated her letter into speeches and public events. A particular comment resonated with her. It originated from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. "My mother experienced a time when she was pushed out of a bank queue and dismissed it with a laugh. She stated, 'People like us don't make noise.' I wish she could have witnessed this. Ms. Daniels, thank you. Your words helped me remember not to dismiss things so easily." Marlene was seated near the window, holding her phone and a letter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't protested. She hadn't created a video. She simply stated the facts. However, the crucial moment she awaited hadn't arrived. It was pending on a campus stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marlene hadn't slept well. Amidst the news reports, the communications, and the sensation of being observed by countless unseen individuals, finding peace had been challenging. Yet, her steps were firm as she entered the campus of Purdue University, her focus resolute. She wore a navy blue dress and a coordinating hat, the very one she'd reserved for a significant occasion. This was that occasion. She was unconcerned if people recognized her now. Let them. Today was not about her. She was there to witness her granddaughter's walk. The stadium seating was almost completely full when she located her row. A security guard approached her, held her gaze for a moment, then smiled. "Ms. Daniels, yes?" He said, "I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground." She nodded warmly. "Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter." He reached into his pocket and continued, "The dean of students asked me to escort you to a reserved section. For family. It has a better view." Marlene paused, questioning, "Reserved for whom?" He smiled. "For you." She followed him upwards to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was designated with a folded card. "Mrs. Marlene Daniels, guest of honor." She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a spotlight. There was no podium, just a seat, and it belonged to her. Offered, not taken. Shortly, the ceremony commenced. Names were announced. Gowns flowed. Applause resounded. Then, Alia Denise Daniels. The name resonated through the air like a church bell. Marlene watched as her granddaughter advanced, tall, radiant, her eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She saw her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile wavered, only to return, fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. Following the ceremony, the family assembled beneath a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already debating who was taking whom to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was adjusting her youngest shirt. Alia hurried to her and embraced her grandmother's waist, almost dislodging the hat. "You made it," she murmured. "Naturally I did," Marlene responded. "Do you imagine a seating error would prevent me?" They laughed, lingering in the embrace. Alia retreated, her eyes glistening. "I witnessed everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I'm receiving messages from students at school, professors, classmates, individuals I don't even know. You've instigated conversations." "I didn't attempt to," Marlene stated. "I simply didn't want to remain silent anymore." Alia concurred. "Perhaps we don't always have to raise our voices. But when we do speak, people should pay attention." Later that afternoon, while gathering her belongings back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slid under her door. It bore the Coastal Air logo in an embossed design. The letter contained an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit, with all expenses covered. They described it as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. "Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call," said a representative. "We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands." "I'm flattered," Marlene said plainly, "but I won't be attending." The woman on the other end paused. "May I ask why?" Marlene responded, "I wasn't moved to speak for your company. I spoke because my dignity fell out of place in row 19. She concluded the call softly and settled onto the bed's edge, observing a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind swirled leaves in lazy circles. She didn't require a public forum. She had already conveyed her message, and it was apparent without explicit statement. This time, the seat wasn't withheld from her. It was presented. She simply declined to occupy it. However, there was one final matter she needed to address. The information wasn't shared with the airline, nor with reporters. It was for all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, observing the activity on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of untold stories. She sipped coffee from paper cup, her hands now steady. The commotion had subsided. News cycles had moved on. Trending topics had displaced her face with fresh headlines. And that was acceptable. Marlene's actions weren't motivated by a desire for attention. They stemmed from an internal resistance to diminishing. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from an unknown sender, a retired nurse in Arizona. The message read, "I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to." Marlene reread the message, then put her phone away and surveyed the terminal. People passed by her, pulling carry-on bags, enjoying lattes, and holding onto their children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wore her usual gray sweater and pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. Yet, if one observed carefully, there was a certain quality to her demeanor, a quiet strength that surpassed mere physical bearing. She recalled the many years she had dedicated to assuring her students they mattered, instilling in young black girls the importance of carrying themselves with confidence, articulating their thoughts with precision, and refusing to allow others to diminish their worth. She believed she had concluded imparting this guidance upon her retirement. She was mistaken. Self-respect is inherent. It isn't acquired through achievement or dependent on positions, designations, or connections. It isn't bestowed by unfamiliar individuals, and it cannot be compromised when circumstances deem it problematic for another. It is rightfully yours, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. That was the core principle. It resonated not only with those who observed her movement down the plane aisle, but with the reserved individuals. Those who suppressed their dignity countless times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms. Those who've been subtly indicated to relinquish their seat, either physically or figuratively, to someone deemed more significant. Marlene's story wasn't concerning revenge. It wasn't reflecting anger. It wasn't even focused on that man or that airline. The memory centered on the decision she made, resolving that she wouldn't remain silent for anyone. Just before her flight was scheduled to board, she rose and stretched. A young girl close by gently pulled on her mother's sleeve and murmured, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene offered a slight smile. It wasn't a broad smile, nor one seeking acknowledgement. It was the type of smile that conveyed, "I am aware of my identity." As she proceeded toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her initial journey appeared, though in a different uniform on a different day. The woman looked up, a flash of recognition in her eyes. She offered a brief nod. Marlene stated simply, "Good morning." Nothing more, nothing less. A lengthy explanation wasn't necessary. Applause wasn't required. She possessed something more valuable: serenity. As the gate opened and boarding commenced, Marlene didn't hurry. She waited patiently. She proceeded deliberately, and, upon reaching her row, yes, first class once more, she positioned her bag under the seat, took a seat, and gazed out the window. The sky stretched endlessly. She remained silent for the entire flight because she felt no need to speak. Occasionally, the most impactful declaration is simply holding your place, particularly when others anticipate you to relinquish it. Therefore, if you're hearing this and you've ever felt diminished for asserting yourself, recall Marlene Daniels. Not because she became widely known online, but because she never increased her volume, and yet everyone understood her. If this narrative resonated with you, please share it. Speak when you are able. Remain in your seat when required. And most importantly, never allow another person to determine when your dignity is present.